This is War Junk, the podcast, based on the TV series, produced by Northern Sky Entertainment. Roll the opening.
I'm Professor David O'Keefe.
And I'm history buff and filmmaker Wayne Abbott.
Together, we travel the globe searching for war junk.
Remnants, artifacts, anything left over on the battlefields.
Some big, some small,
All with a story to tell.
and a mystery or two to solve along the way.
This is War Junk, the podcast, with Professor David O'Keefe and me, Wayne Abbott. Hey, Dave.
We're back. Wow.
We're back with episode 3. We made it this far.
One at a time, my friend, one at a time.
Well, I'm excited about this episode because we have a special guest and we're going to be talking about an area of Flanders that is so special to us, isn't it?
Yeah, it was one of those things like when we started off, we went to Hong Kong and then we were trying to figure out exactly where we were going to go with the show. And it was right around the time when the 100th anniversary of World War I was coming up. And next thing you know, we're doing World War I battlefields. And that's what took us to Ypres, the site of some incredible fighting and a lot of sacrifice during the war.
Yeah, you mentioned because the first 2 episodes were focused on the Battle of Hong Kong, which was a 3-week battle. And amazingly, the listeners and viewers who watch that or listen to the podcast, I mean, we tell about solving a mystery of an artifact that had no name, no number etched on it. It was only from the location and the files that we uncovered that we were able to solve the mystery. And that's unique to Hong Kong because it was 3 weeks and it just basically swept through Hong Kong Island. But now we're talking Battle of Ypres. So set this story up with the Battle of Ypres.
This is a bit different. We're not talking about, like you said, a 3-week battle where you have a limited amount of players in it. Here you have the area of Ypres, which was Ypres. The British called it Wipers, but of course it's Ypres or Ypres as the Belgians know it. A town in Belgium which really had no strategic importance until 2 sets of armies collided and then dug in. And it's kind of that fate and luck in war. In other words, Ypres was never supposed to be the center of a battlefield. Well, that happened in 1914, and for the next 4 years, the entire Eep Salient was one of the greatest battlefields the world has ever seen. When I say great, I don't mean wonderful. I certainly mean that it took about 2 million lives from all sides over 4 years. There were 5 major battles that were fought there, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Ypres. And they started fighting in the fall of 14, and they didn't finish until November 11th. And the entire area is just one remnant of a charnel house. One of the worst battlefields in the history of the world is right there in Belgium.
Well, I guess most people have seen the images or the photos of the Eep Salient and, especially like Passchendaele, where you see the mud and the trenches. It's unbelievable the conditions that some of these soldiers not only had to fight through, but also live through.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing. And I'm sure, later podcasts, we're going to get into the mud of Flanders Field, which, as you know, we had experiences with ourselves, nowhere near what they were, experiencing in 14 to 18. But it gave you a bit of empathy, to say the least, of what these poor guys had to go through. But when you're talking this area, I mean, I think one of the things for us, which is fascinating about the battlefield, is the layers of archaeology that are here. You've got 4 years of fighting, which means there's 4 levels of battlefield archaeology. And if you start digging on battlefields like this, you have no clue what you're going to find. Not to mention the fact that millions of men were locked in battle over those 4 years. So even though it's, as we've talked about in the past, it's a target-rich environment for archaeology, trying to make any sense out of it and identifying anything becomes really difficult because of that.
Well, the focus of any War Junk show, was telling the story of war by what was left behind. And we have a special guest because there's one area, there's one farm that we've shot at a number of times, including the second show, which we did do on the Battle of Ypres. So this is a farm that saw 4 to 5 years of war. So when you talk about the layers, I think our next guest, and a very special friend to us and a big part of the War Junk family, can really give us a sense, because we come in as storytellers and we pop in and we pop out. This gentleman has lived on the fallout and the remnants of World War I his entire life. So without further ado, let's bring on Stijn, who's from Belgium.
Hi guys.
Hey,
Great to
Stijn.
see you again.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. You are looking good as well. Yeah.
Well, you know, we're a little older than when we first met you, but yeah.
Yeah, after 10 years.
Oh, 10
And,
years. Hey,
since
did you hear that? He threw in an A.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's had a lot of Canadians come to his farm. I think when Stijn, we first met Stijn, it was in 2013. And even though you did have some digital footprint and you had your museum, Stijn, you were still relatively early, I guess, into your collection as a digger and a collector.
Yeah, 10 years ago it was the beginning of my collection. Yeah, I started since my 12, and now I'm doing this for 24 years. So my collection is expanding. But the first time you came over, it was it was a little bit smaller than now. Yeah.
All right, so let's go back a little bit. I mean, we mentioned in the intro that, you know, you live on the farm, and this is obviously the family farm, but tell us how the family ended up on the farm.
Well, the first owner of Pond Farm was Arsène Marant, and he lived here already before the war. But the Germans were coming, of course, on 20 October 1914, yeah, and then they all had to go to France. And they stayed there for approximately 7 years. And in 1921, Arsène Marant came back. He built our first house here in the area, and that's where my museum is now. And then later on, he even helped rebuilding the church in Saint Julian. But after Arsène Marant, I think he lived here till the 60s. Then my grandfather took it over. And then he saw, of course, all the German bunkers around his property. So he blew that all up. And
Whoa. Hang on a second. Go back.
Oh.
He blew up bunkers.
He blew up the bunkers, yeah, because they were German, and it was in his way. Yeah, it were gigantic bunkers, 40 meters long. It was insane.
So when your grandfather first took over the farm, how many bunkers were still on the farm?
There were 38 bunkers in total.
38?
38. So Pond Farm was a German headquarter in 1917, and a very strong headquarter. So my grandfather, he had a lot of work. Yeah.
Wow, you can imagine. I mean, you know, it goes to what we were just talking about in the intro, how, you know, this whole area was never supposed to see war. And then suddenly between 14 and 1918, it develops into the most heavily fortified area in the entire Western Front, essentially. Mm-hmm. And 38 bunkers. How big is your farm?
Our farm is 90 acres. So it's big enough, and we live just on the right place in the middle of the front, just between Passchendaele and Ypres.
So roughly one bunker every 2 acres. Lovely.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Wow. And what type of bunkers? Were they fighting bunkers? Were they shelters? Were they ammunition? What were they used for?
So most of them were shelters. They were a part underground, and we had one big one of 60 meters long. And that bunker was a hospital bunker. Yeah, and in that bunker, I think it had 6 rooms. And when my grandfather wanted to clean it out, he said, "Oh, it's full of skeletons." So he had to remove them first before blowing them up.
Skeletons.
Yeah, correct.
One bunker was full of skeletons.
Yeah.
What year was this?
This was in the 60s. Yeah.
So you're talking 40 plus years after World War I. Your grandfather is finding skeletons in one of these bunkers.
Yeah, that's correct. Because even that bunker, it was so big. It had 6 different rooms, and it was really filled up all with skeletons. and he had to remove them first before blowing them up. That's logic, of course. And he called the priests, and they came to do their thing, and then they removed the skeletons to the German cemetery in Langemark.
So these were all German bodies, I assume. Oh, wow. I think you might have mentioned that, but not so many. And the fact that they were still there all those years after the war, that's great that you're, I mean, this is the absolute amazing thing about living in Flanders like that. I mean, all those years later, your grandfather had to go through that, had to, just to get rid of the bunkers, had to get rid of the bodies first.
Yeah.
What was the effect on the family over all these years?
Yeah, well, we have to get used to it. Especially there's war everywhere here, and still after more than 100 years. Even if we are plowing the fields, we still find stuff. It's everywhere, and even concrete pieces of bunkers, pieces that my grandfather left behind, all kinds of shells everywhere.
So it's not an easy area to farm, is what you're saying.
No, because it's dangerous. Yeah, if you are plowing the field, you are driving blindly over the field, and if you hit something, yeah, it will go off, or it will stay in the ground. So, yeah, there's always a risk. Yeah,
there's always a risk.
With your family plowing the land since the 60s, was there ever a nasty incident that's happened?
Every 10 years we have approximately an explosion. My father, he hit once a gas shell, and it was a phosgene, and it was a lot of white poison smoke. So it's very dangerous, of course. My mom saw that, and it was noon, and he had to eat. But she first took, of course, a photograph before she went after him. But everything was okay with my father, and luckily we are getting used to it. But it's still dangerous. That stuff, it still works after 100 years.
So your father hit a shell, but your mother took the few seconds to take the photo before she went to help him?
Yeah, because it was noon and he had to eat.
Is that symbolic of life in Flanders? In other words, for the rest of the world, we'd be freaking out, but for you guys, it's kind of par for the course?
It's still munition, but we have to work here. We have to do our thing. We have to live with it. We do not live in a city. We live here in an open area, so that's already something. But if you find a shell, we bring it home and then we put it in a cage.
Well, we've had that experience with you a number of times while we filmed on Pond Farm, and you're right. I mean, even while we've been there for just little periods of time, it didn't take long for us to dig up unexploded ordnance, including gas shells, right?
Well, I think it's a gas shell.
Yeah, correct. They fired 300 million shells in the war, and 30% didn't go off. And Flanders, how big is Flanders? 20 kilometers. So those shells are everywhere in the field. We can't ignore it. And the 30% that is still alive, it's still dangerous. Those fuels are still working.
I think that was one of the lasting impressions, I think, on both of us, was the iron harvest that happens every year. Like, here we are over 100 years later, and you're still getting shells that are coming out of the ground and pieces of material that were left there. I mean, it really is amazing. And, you were saying that there were hundreds of millions of shells that were fired, and only, 30% of them were so-called duds, which means there's still a lot of unexploded ordnance sitting around, and particularly in the Ypres area, which is, like you said, only 20 kilometers, square. What's it like? What is the process when you find a shell? What do you do?
So if you find a shell, we bring them home. We put them in a cage. It sounds a bit crazy, but we collect them first till season time is over. And then we call the police. Then they come and see how many shells there are in that cage. And then they give it to the bomb disposal. and then they come to pick it up in about a week or something like that. And they come with the truck with sand, and then they put them nicely on the backside of the truck. But those guys are used to it to do that. But of course, if we are plowing the field, we can't wait on them, and that's why we move them on our own to that cage.
So the bomb squad won't come into your field per se, right? Like they expect you when you find a unexploded shell, a gas shell, grenades, whatever, they expect you to take those, and it could be a mile away or more, to the central pickup spot. Is that basically the protocol?
They come and pick them up in the field as well, but then we have to mark the shell with a wooden pole. We have to paint it, and then we have to farm around it, and that's a little bit the problem. That's why we move it on our own to that cage.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
So basically, you make a phone call every once in a while and say, "We've got junk," and
Yes.
you end up. Except, wow, yeah. I mean that's that's something that most people who are listening to this podcast or watching it could never fathom in their lives. It's one thing finding something on your property, but nothing that goes boom, or potentially goes boom.
Yeah, I think Dave's raised a good point. If you are listening to this podcast, which I'm sure a lot of people are on their podcast app, try to get to War Junk TV on YouTube, because there's a video version of this. And as Stijn's talking, we are going to be putting visuals of Stijn working in the field, finding these unexploded bombs and we've seen Stijn walk and carry these shells to the cage. We've also seen Stijn put it in the tractor and drive it. So do try to get to War Junk TV on YouTube to visually see Pond Farm and see some of the things that Stijn and his family and all the farmers in the area have to deal with. You've always said, Stijn, that this one line, it's life in Flanders. Is that how most people take it? Because I don't even think people understand how many shells, unexploded shells, gas shells do you find a year? And is it getting less and less, or is it the same?
Yeah, it depends. It depends of the winter. So how stronger the winter, how more metal is rising up, and the soil is cleaning itself. And the metal is wet, the water turns into ice, and then because of the pressure, it comes up. So how stronger the winter, how more shells we can find. Some years we have 40 shells in the cage, other years they are just 10 or something. It depends.
But you can get up to 40 plus. I think we were there and you even had more than that. So, but this is 100 plus years after the war. And we're going to be showing images like right now of multiple shells in the cage. And some of these include gas, and you are even picking up gas shells and moving to this cage, are you not?
Yeah, and that is getting the biggest problem, because gas shells are very dangerous, because they are the gas is corroding the shell on the inside, and those shells are now for more than 100 years in the ground. So the gas is coming up, it's corroding on the metal, it's making holes, and then the gas comes up just like that. And sometimes you can see a white cloud or a yellow cloud, and then we know it's phosgene or the mustard gas, the Ypres. Yeah, it happens. If it gets in contact with oxygen, then you see the white smoke. And then you need to look where the wind is coming from, and then the best thing you can do is go away.
Okay. Well, I think number one, we should probably caution everybody that you do this because of circumstance. You live there, you need to do this. But, for the people who are going to visit, probably not a good idea to go souvenir hunting in fields. You got to be very careful on these fields. I remember one of the incidents when we were over there. If I'm not mistaken, it was construction workers who had found a shell and decided they were going to clean it up themselves. Yeah. And sadly, it blew up and it killed them. And I mean, this is something that you have to realize, that here we are even 100 years later, and World War I at times is still claiming victims. That just is mind-boggling. So quickly take us through what you do to identify the shells, and then how do you treat each one of those?
Well, I know the difference between a German shell and a British shell, by example. So you can see that on the drive band. The Germans, they had a smaller drive band. The British were a little bit wider. The Germans also, at the end of the war, they used more zinc and aluminium because that was cheaper than the copper. And then if I see a German shell, then we are already thinking, oh, be careful, it could be a gas one. And if it's a gas shell, then we always wear gloves. We take no risk. We are so careful. If it's too dangerous, then we leave it on the field. Then we call the police, they call the bomb disposal, and then they come and pick it up on the site itself. There's always a risk. And yeah, again, we have to live with it.
It's amazing because we've been to Pond Farm so many times, and it's always, I think, amazed Dave and I that this cage that you then fill with, and it's locked, you have a lock on it, and it's filled with all types of unexploded ordnance, is right beside the farmhouse, basically.
Yeah, that's correct. But those shells are in a cage of Faraday, so even if the lightning would hit it, then the shells are even safer in that cage than outside somewhere in the field.
See, yeah. But it is something when you come from outside a war zone to come into Flanders, and you guys are still living in the remnants of a war zone 100+ years. And you got to go there to see it. But this is how much it's shaped your life, hasn't it? Living on Pond Farm.
Well, you can say that, yes. When I was 12, by example, my parents, they learned me to work on the field, of course, to weed in the field. And I came once inside the house and I said to my mom, "Oh, Mom, look what I have found." And she said, "Oh, go outside, it's a grenade." Yeah, and then you learn about the war, and yeah, then your life is changing because they are giving me more information about the war.
Yeah.
What is dangerous and not, and yeah, that's how it all started.
So in the last few years, then you have created more than a few years now, you've created your own museum, which I'm assuming has been growing and growing and growing. It's been a few years since we've seen you. And, I always say that, there are a couple of places, if you're going to the Ypres area, you've got to go to. You've got to go to Menengate, you've got to go to the ceremonies, and you got to go to Pond Farm. And it's the experience that you get at Pond Farm makes your farm next to the Menengate, the destination if you're in the area. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what you can show people when you're there, and they get a sense like we did, which is completely different than just reading something out of a book. I mean, you understand what life was like during the war, and again, what life is like after all these years later, and you guys having to deal with it on a regular basis. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I want to give something to the people. I want to let them feel something. I want to let them go inside a bunker. I want to give them findings from myself. Even that's what I want to reach with my small project. But I'm proud on it.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we wanted to mention, and I'm glad Dave brought it up, is that Pond Farm isn't just us going and filming. Stijn has a beautiful museum there. I think, Stijn, you have to make arrangements so you'll be there when somebody shows up.
Yeah, that's correct. So people, they have to make an appointment via my website. And then I try to be here on the farm because I'm an electrician as well by day. And I help even with farming. So it's a busy life, but it's okay.
I am going to play a clip now of what we filmed a few years ago of your museum. I know it's changed, but this is the first time we were there. This is a scene from War Junk, World War I, Battle of Ypres. We've met Stijn, and he takes us into the museum. So you get a sense, the people who are watching this on War Junk TV, you'll get a sense of just how amazing his museum is. And now it's even larger with more artifacts. But every artifact you see here is from the farm. So let me just play this now.
Holy God! You did this?
This is my hobby.
All this from your farm?
Yes. Everything was founded around our farm.
How many pieces do you have here?
I do not know that.
Oh my
A lot.
Apparently.
I have built this in 10 years' time.
In 10 years. That's it. I mean, this seems to be more than a collection. What was really impressive, though, was the fact that all this war junk was plucked from this 40-acre farm, from rifles to bayonets to gas canisters and gas masks, all on display. It's amazing. It truly takes you back to the full 4 years of fighting here on Pond Farm. I wouldn't want to be wearing one of these.
So that's a snippet of your museum the way it looked a decade ago. And even then, I think we made a mistake by saying it was 40 acres. It's actually 90 acres. Is that it?
It's 90 acres, correct.
Which is still not a huge farm, but still a good patch of land that you're getting this from. But so everything in those images, every artifact on the shelf there, and that's only one room. You still had other rooms. That's at that point, that was everything from Pond Farm that you had dug up.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and everything comes from here, from the 90 acres on the farm, all by metal detecting or by plowing the field, or sometimes it's an eye find. If you have a lot of raining, then the land is washed up because of the heavy rains, and then we find all the little stuff. And my collection is growing every year, and now the whole house is filled up with stuff.
I think the first thing that really struck me was just how historic the area is, because when we saw it from the air, we thought, okay, this is fascinating, let's go down. But when you start researching it, you realize this was the advanced headquarters of Arthur Currie, the famous Canadian general who was a brigadier at this time. And they were pushed out. His was tactical headquarters, and they were pushed out during the first gas attack in history, or at least major gas attack in history, in April of 1915. And then, of course, the Germans sat on this and developed it until, well, when was the farm finally taken by the British? In late 17?
On 22 August 1917.
Middle of 1917.
22 August, so August 22nd, 1917, it was taken by the British. That's during Passchendaele, right?
Yeah.
When did the Germans first get to Pond Farm? What year was that? 1915?
So the Germans arrived here on 20 October 1914. And then the Canadians took it over in 1915 in April.
And how long did our illustrious Canadians have Pond Farm?
How do you say?
How long did they have it?
Canadians. How long?
Okay, so when the Canadians were on Pond Farm from 22 April to 24 April in 1915. And then the Germans, they took it over on 24 April. So they didn't have it very long. Yeah. And General Arthur Currie, he had to jump out of a window because of a heavy explosion. And then the Germans took it over. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And the Germans, they had their gas attacks. They were at Steenstraate. They had a big advantage with that. And that's how they could take over our farm.
It's amazing how it changed hands so many times. I wish the Canadians could have held on it longer for you. But then the Germans built the bunkers then, starting when?
Yeah, correct. So when they were here in April 15, then they had 2 years the time to build all their bunkers, and they built 38 bunkers in total. It took a lot of work, but they had a lot of soldiers as well, and they had to build them always by night. Really? That's how they did it. Yeah.
So all these years later, how many of these bunkers are actually left intact on your land?
Just one.
Just one.
And
one. Why is there one?
My grandfather, he blew up all the bunkers because he said they were too big. It took too much place on his property. He also said to me, they were German. Yeah, he was not proud of that to have that on his property, so he blew it all up. And so now he blew them up. Yeah. And now there's only one left because the basement was cracking inside the house. The barn was cracking. And my grandmother, she said, "Oh, you have to stop. My basement is cracking. Just leave it over there." And that's why I have a bunker.
Back in the 60s, in the good old days, when you could pack a building on your land with explosives and blow it up.
Yeah. But if you still had the 38 bunkers, then I think this area would be UNESCO World Heritage.
It would.
Yeah, because 38 bunkers, and the biggest one was 60 meters long. So yeah.
Wow. And this is at the time, of course, like you said previously, he found one bunker full of German bodies.
Yeah, correct.
It's unbelievable, Stijn. The fact that your family owns this piece of land and all the layers of World War I that you uncover daily. We've had a sneak peek at it. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to show a scene. It's from the museum. I'll play this and then you can explain more of it. But we know that this is Stijn's most special artifact that he has dug up on Pond Farm.
Anything else you have around here that's really unique?
Yes, of course. I've got a piece of tank.
A piece of tank?
Yes.
You have a piece of a World War I tank.
Here it is.
Is it this?
Yeah.
I walked right by it. I didn't even notice what it was. The tanks at this time were extremely rare. There were only a couple of hundred in existence. To actually see a part from a tank, and particularly one this sizable, was really quite something. Well, what is this then? Is that a part of a tread?
Well, that's a part of the track.
Part of the track.
Part of the track, and that's a side plate.
This was most likely part of a British Mark IV tank. The tread and plate came from the rear portion of the tank. Designed to work as mobile pillboxes, tanks would strike out into no man's land to crumple barbed wire, silence machine gun positions, and help the infantry breach enemy trenches. Most of the early ones, however, proved too slow, too temperamental, and were prone to floundering in the Flanders mud. Do you still think there are more pieces here?
Yes, I'm sure of it.
Wow. Now, would you be interested in getting the War Junk team involved to help you out?
That would be great, because it's very hard work to dig and to search alone in the ground. It's too hard.
And I mean, there's nothing better than getting in and finding some fresh war junk on a World War I battlefield.
Wow.
Wow.
It's that tank piece is pretty special. So, tell us why.
Well, I found that tank piece in 2012. So first I found the side plate just because of the heavy raining. We just found it with our eye. It was so easy like that. And then I thought, there were tanks here in the area. And I had an old school teacher who was very interested about tanks. And he did some research for me. And that's how we did some searching in the field where I found that side plate. And if I went with my metal detector, then I found some track plates. I found pieces of the engine. It's amazing that all those tanks were here around the farm and that you can still find those pieces here on our own field.
It really is unique and really historic because, of course, unlike today and, World War II till today, where we take tanks on the battlefield for granted, tanks had just been developed and were just making their debut. So what you're finding or what you found on your farm was truly unique. Yeah,
indeed. And the story was the tank was patrolling around the farm, but the engine was overheated because those engines were not strong enough and they gave always problems. So that tank got stuck, and in the regiment report I could read that they removed the engine cover and they threw that engine cover into a shell crater. And then I said, I have to search again with my metal detector. And of course, then I found the engine cover. And that's how it proved that tank was from the Glenlivet.
So you identified it as a tank that was nicknamed the Glenlivet?
Yeah, that's a name given by the officers who always drank whiskey in the war. They were very clever in giving names to those tanks, but mine is Glenlivet, and I like that whiskey.
It is amazing that you found that one piece, and it's a small piece of the tank, but you also showed us, and I'll put this up for the people watching on War Junk TV, the actual aerial view of the tank on your farm.
My old school teacher, he found that aerial photograph, and based with that aerial photograph, you can put that on Google Earth, and then you can mark that spot, and then you can go with your GPS exactly on the place where that tank got stuck. And even on that aerial photograph, you can see where the tank drove. And so you can see the tracks in the mud. It's crazy how detailed those pictures were in the war.
Yeah, especially from World War I. Hey, Dave?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is that's the amazing little bit of sleuthing that you did, was to be able to put all this together and literally figure out the specific tank that you were dealing with, which is
we're
really
going to follow up on the tank story in other podcasts, because there's a whole other time when we go back to Pond Farm, and I just want to kind of tease it, where Stijn, basically we solve the mystery of the tank, and we bring a family member in, but that's for another podcast. What I want to show is that in our first show when we were there, because we were so intrigued by the tank, that we wanted to find more tank pieces. So I'm going to play a scene where we're searching for a tank piece, but we came across something even more mysterious. So let me just play this bit. And this is just to set it up for people who are listening. We're out I think we're about a mile or so from the farmhouse, digging in a field, searching for tank pieces. But Stijn and our digger, Craig Mitchell, who came in from Hong Kong that you saw in the last episode, they uncover something, pretty mysterious.
Wayne, have a look at this, buddy.
The discovery was rather shocking. This was not a tank part.
That's not what I think it is it?
This was a shell, a big one.
From the measurements, we think it looks like a 4.5 British high explosive round. Even though Stijn has seen plenty of fuses, he's not seen one like this before.
This is something we didn't expect. A potentially deadly high explosive shell with a mystery fuse.
Well, the big concern is the fuse, because it's one that isn't standard. We don't really know what we're dealing with. It could be smoke, or it could be anything as lethal as high explosives, amatol, anything along those lines.
So that's our mystery shell that we found, but we were searching for more tank pieces very near where you uncovered it. But Stijn, tell us why that is such a kind of one-of-a-kind find, that shell.
Yeah, I never find such a shell anymore. It was a British shell with the protection cap on. So, and it was been fired. So the soldier who fired it, he made a mistake. He did not remove the protection cap, and it's a 1 in a million find. I never find it anymore. So yeah.
You could see, given the kind of fatigue and the stress they were under, how somebody could easily make that mistake. And also, too, by the time you get later in the war, both armies are starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and training is being cut short and people are being rushed to the front. So it could very well be that you have somebody in their first battle who is, inexperienced, or at least not as experienced as a veteran, and somebody who is, tired and exhausted, and these mistakes get made.
Yeah, no, it took us a while. We do a few other scenes where we're trying to investigate it because we thought it was a fuse. But it is amazing that, so everybody listening or watching, it was just, the shells come like that, right? So they have a protection cap. And one of the last things I guess they do before they fire it, they put the fuse on it. And it's more of a triangular thing that really kind of gives it that pointy look. And this thing must have been grabbed by a soldier, put into the gun and fired, and they never put the fuse on it.
Yeah, this is the proof that everyone can make a mistake. And in the war, everyone had stress. There were shells flying around. So for me, it's normal to find such a shell.
It's so unusual. And the fact, too, is we only were digging that area for 1 day. And then, two, the other thing that I think, looking at it now, is how it was only inches under the surface.
Yeah, and that makes it very dangerous, because we only plow 30 centimeters deep. So if it's only in a depth like that, then you would have hit it immediately. So, yeah.
I guess ideally you would go out before you plow the field and metal detect and make sure, but you would be there for weeks trying to metal detect 90 acres.
Well, when I was 12, I had that idea. That was the reason why I bought a metal detector. I said to my dad, look, I'm going to clean the field for you. But that was an impossible job. It's everywhere. And like I told you, the soil is cleaning itself, so it comes up automatically. So, yeah, we will find them every year.
Well, what I'm going to do now is play one of the last scenes of our show that we shot a decade ago. But this one goes back. Now it combines everything. You see the mystery shell, and Stijn couldn't leave it in the field. So what you're going to see or hear is Stijn moving this large mystery shell back to the cage. So you'll get an idea of the cage as well and how many unexploded shells are still in there. This is during the show. We still hadn't solved the mystery. So I think there's something at the end of this clip where we mention the mystery of the shell. This is just under 2 minutes, but it's a riveting scene where brave Stijn is moving that shell on his own, at least a mile or so to the cage. So here it goes.
Okay. So what's the procedure now that you want to do?
Now I want to dig this up very carefully, and then I will put it in the front loader. I have some bags with straw in it, and then I put it on that very carefully, and then I will drive to home.
We're just going to step back. We'll let you do your thing. Let's just hope everything unfolds safely.
Yeah, bring it in a little closer, bring it in.
This is what he deals with every week, every month of the year.
They find about 50 types of shells every year on their property.
And believe me, he's one brave young man.
At this point, Stijn takes the shell very carefully out of the ground.
Lays up.
And places it on a bag of hay in the front loader of the tractor.
So far, so good.
It's quite amazing to watch how calm Stijn is as he handles the unexploded shell. Though the bomb disposal unit will come to Pond Farm to pick up the shells, it's up to Stijn and his family to take them from the field to the cage. This is life in Flanders.
So no problem.
No problem.
Once it's put down safely onto the rest of the live shells, we came over and have a little look at this fuse. You've not seen anything like that either?
No, normally we find them like that.
Much different from any of the other examples he's got already in this cage or in his collection. So, no, it's quite a strange one, isn't it?
Well, I guess this has turned out to be a typical war junk moment. We came looking for a tank, and we end up with the mystery of a shell we've never seen before.
That's still one of the best scenes. Oh, man, Stijn, I just can't believe that your family, this is what you do on a daily, weekly basis.
Well, we are used to it, yeah. But if I saw this video, you are standing so far from the tractor.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we were standing far enough, though.
Yeah.
But wow, I mean, the way you picked that up, and what kind of a shell was that? How was that?
That was a British shell. So the Germans were here on the farm, and we were searching on the site where the British were. So there was a chance they fired somewhere in the area that shell. And I think they wanted to reach the farm, but they missed a little bit. Yeah.
There's something about finding it like that, though. To see the size of it and realize that it didn't go off and yet it could crush somebody if it hit them. I mean, it was just, because we always talk, we see the explosions and we talk, but we don't really understand or fathom what it's like to see the size of the shell right there. That really was something that really, it drove it home to me of what it would have been like to be on the receiving end in some cases, to see that kind of power. The explosion that would have created. Wow.
Well, for me, that was just a small one. Because you had 15-inch shells, that's 700 kilos, and those shells are here in the area. So it's a small one.
Small one, but I still think we needed to stand further away, Dave.
Yeah.
But no, it's amazing. I mean, war junk is the epitome. No, Pond Farm is the epitome of war junk. I mean, it's like everything about, like, as I said earlier, our TV show and now our podcast, it's all about telling the story of war through what's been left behind. And not only are you telling the story of what happened in Ypres, you're telling a story of a farm that's in your family and how it's just all intermixed. The history and what's going on present day. And it's not just your farm, because we've been on other farms as well, and people are faced with the same thing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how the legacy of war, particularly World War I, still goes on to this day.
So, Stijn, just before we go, I think this is a great place to end this podcast, and we're going to pick up the story on a later shoot. But do you have anything there just to show us? I think you said you had a few little artifacts that you've picked up recently. Anything to show us that's in your room there?
Of course. I found recently, it's a part of a wallet. So you can see here the leather.
Wow.
Even this is a silver coin. It's a German Reich mark. So very rare to find like that. And some smaller coins.
Did you clean that up, or was that the way you found it?
We found it just like that.
Wow.
That means it's real silver.
Wow. So that's a wallet you found recently. And you found other wallets, haven't you? I mean, this is the other thing. Yeah.
Found other wallets still with the coins in it. So if I go over it with my metal detector, it makes noise. But it's too fragile to open it. So I leave it just, how I found it.
This is the amazing thing, because I know we got so into talking about the unexploded ordinance and the coldness and the deadly part of war, but then you're also finding these human elements, like the human stories, these artifacts that are just so personal and so touching.
Yeah, like this pocket watch. That was a German pocket watch. I can't open it anymore because it's corroded, of course. But normally on the inside, there's a photograph of the soldier. Yeah, and also if you find a pocket watch like that, sometimes you can read the time when the soldier died, and that makes it special. And those are the best finds for me.
No kidding.
Were you able to identify that at all?
No, impossible.
Well, look, Stijn, you're a special man. I mean, we admire you because you have such a passion for history. You and your family live history every day. But there would be other people that would have taken over that farm and probably would have considered this pure war junk and thrown it all out. As Dave mentioned in our first podcast, we call it war junk because there is some junk we find, but there's a lot of the stuff we find that you think is junk. It's perceived junk until you tell the story, and then it's anything but junk. And man, what you do and what you've done with Pond Farm, and if anybody's over in Flanders or near Ypres, you got to contact this man. We'll put the email up at the end of the show, but you can also write us. If you want to you can write Stijn directly, or if you have a question for Stijn, write us at warjunkpodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from the listeners and the people watching this on Warjunk TV. And if you have a mystery artifact or you have a question, please write us. And hopefully we'll hear from you. But Stijn, thank you. We're going to pick up part 2 very soon.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, Stijn.
It's been great. This has been War Junk, the podcast, hosted by Professor David O'Keefe and me, Wayne Abbott. Please write us at warjunkpodcast@gmail.com, and you can watch the podcast on our YouTube channels, War Junk the Podcast and War Junk TV. And to contact Stijn, go to the Pond Farm website. This is a Northern Sky Entertainment production.